Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this presentation. Hopefully that my webcam is working this time. So I'd like to introduce Erick Moore and Loay Shbeilat for this. But while we're waiting for everybody to join, we'll go through some trivia just to try to have some fun and mix it up a little bit. So first question is, the song Happy Birthday originated from what state? And I doubt we'll have another Indiana this time. Although I have a brother that'll probably tell all my kids that he's the inventor of Happy Birthday, but. And again, at the bottom, we're going to do chat and not Q&A for this. Helps if I actually have it pulled up. Thanks, Stuart. So we got California, Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky. Oh, we're getting everywhere. I know there's a kind of a lag, so I'll just give it a second more. And then it looks like we have a winner, so we'll switch it over. And the answer is Kentucky. Nice job, Jeff K. So if you can send your information to Jennifer Gibson at mycugc.org, it'd be awesome. We'll get you hooked up. Next question, what year did Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Columbus, Ohio induct their inaugural class? Again, there's quite a bit of lag sometimes, so we'll just give it a few seconds, start seeing some names pop up, some answers. Remember, you can use Google. We're not ashamed, and I'm sure it's a lot of our best friends throughout the days of working. Again, my brother would probably say it was the year that he was born. Benjamin, you could try to fact check us and see if that was true or not, but. All right, we're getting some years in there, so we're going to check it out, and it's 1986. Good job, LL. And the last question, what musical instrument is played at the start of the Kentucky Derby? Well, you got to give us a little bit better than Wikipedia, Ben. And I think we already got one. Yes, I believe it was the bugle. Good job, Brian B. Again, just send your information to Jennifer, and she'll get you hooked up with some cool gifts. And with no further ado, we'll switch over to our presenters. So I'd like to introduce Erick Moore and Loay Shbeilat to talk about the Microsoft and Citrix partnerships. Erick is a senior cloud solutions architect with Microsoft, and Loay is a Citrix solutions architect. So we'll turn it over and let them talk about their latest on the partnerships between the two.
All right. Thank you. Everyone can hear me okay, I presume? Yes? Looks good? We can see the slide? I'll just assume that's an okay. All right. So what Loay and I are going to do is I'm going to start by talking about, WVD, what it is, just kind of high level walk through some of the components so you have an understanding. We'll talk a little bit about where Citrix fits in with that. And then I'm going to pass it off to Loay so he could talk more specifically about the specifics on what Microsoft and Citrix are doing together. Okay, So let's talk about WVD, right? So this went GA last October-ish timeframe. That was kind of the Gen 1 release. We're now on our version 2, which a lot of folks are waiting for. If you're not familiar with the iterations of WVD, the first one was not ARM integrated, so that's a big part of Azure. So what happens there was people were waiting until we had the ARM deployment, which that went GA in June. So it's all hands on deck, ready to go for WVD deployments. But I'll just say that a couple big points of differentiation for WVD, and we'll talk about how Citrix has some of these things available in Azure as well. And the big one is this Win 10 multi-session, right? That's really been the big driving factor for WVD. It used to be called Win 10 multi-session. It's now called Windows 10 Enterprise. That version of Windows 10 is only available within Azure. So in terms of how do you get access to this, right? So most people, if you have one of these licensing components already in place, you're entitled to use Win 10 Enterprise, formerly Win 10 Multi-Session in WVD. That entitlement is also granted to Citrix Cloud running inside of Azure as well. So you can layer Citrix in the solution and get the benefits of Win 10 multi-session. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's an important component. All right, so architecture, let's talk about it. On the left-hand side here, you've got clients. So this is how you can connect into WVD. You've got a lot of different options. So we have thick client support for Android, iOS, Linux, Mac OS, Windows, and then any HTML5 browser also works just fine. On the right-hand side, you've got the components that you're going to manage, which would be kind of that back-end infrastructure, the compute layer, the storage, the apps. And then in the middle, this is the part that Microsoft managed. This part here really is the core of WVD, right? So we now manage your web access, the load balancing, the gateway, session broker, all that's quote unquote a managed service, right? So all you're doing at that point is managing the images and the compute on the back end and pointing users to a URL for authentication. So how they authenticate, right? So this is kind of another important concept. So when we bring in desktops into WVD, we don't have to open up any inbound public-facing ports. So that's a really important thing when we start looking at security and cloud security. So anything on the right-hand side that you're looking at there, those desktops, all private IP, all within a isolated virtual network that you control. And then there's just an outbound connection. There's a little agent that's installed on there that connects that VM into the WVD system. So from a client standpoint, when they hit the log on, the first thing they're going to do is get an authentication token from AAD, so Azure Active Directory. It's going to validate that they are who they say they are. We have an identity matching service that's matching that to the Active Directory SID of the user. If it all ties in, what happens is you get this connection flow where we are directed on 443 outbound to the gateway, and then all traffic now flows out of that outbound flow. So we call it reverse connect. So it's very popular with security teams, obviously, because again, I don't have to open up any inbound ports, and it's all secured via SSL outbound on 443. Okay, so prerequisites to deploy WVD, handful of things. We do have a requirement that these things are domain joined. So that's very important, right? So if you have deployments today that are, part of a work group, they're not part of a domain, probably not a good fit for WVD. They do have to be domain joined. They can be domain joined with Azure ADDS, so AADDS, or traditional domain controllers. The next step is if you're going to use FSLogic's profiles or profile redirection or potentially pooled desktops, and we'll talk about pooled versus personal, you're going to have somewhere to store those VHDs. Typically, that's Azure files or Azure NetApp files. believe it or not, the least used thing we see is VMs running SMB or something like that within Azure. So it's usually Azure NetApp files or Azure Premium files is the choice to host those user profile VHDs. And then, of course, if you're doing a WVD deployment, if you're doing a proof of concept, you have to have an Azure subscription. You have to have certain rights within that subscription to be able to provision these things. And most importantly, you have to have access to a domain controller with an account that's able to domain join those systems when they're being deployed. So network considerations, right? I mentioned the domain join. That's really the important piece. Something to think about there too is any firewalling that's in between. Very common to have firewalls on the edge when you're dealing with cloud. So ingress, egress filtering from on-premises into Azure and vice versa. So allowing that domain communication, all the NetBIOS traffic and all the other things that need to happen for that. Very important that's open and allowed to flow. Best practice would be to put a domain controller or some sort of authentication mechanism in Azure close to where the compute lives to improve the logon experience and everything for the end users. If you were 100% in Azure, which I don't have any accounts that I work with are, but if you were, you wouldn't need to have VPN or ExpressRoute or something like that to connect both. But again, every customer I work with already has domain infrastructure in place. They've got their on-premise data center. So you're going to need some sort of connectivity to extend that. All right, let's walk through some of the terminology. So this is the main components of WVD. So we have host pools, session host, application groups, and what we call a workspace. So the host pool is really just a logical collection of session hosts. So session hosts are the actual VMs to compute. The host pool also determines the type of desktop, if we're going with pooled desktops or personal desktops. So if you choose pooled, you now have scaling options. There's no scaling options for personal desktops because it's a one-to-one mapping. But if I do a pooled desktop, I can have scaling options of either depth or breadth. So what that means is as users are connecting, if I've got a shared Win10 multi-session image, so I'm going to have multiple users on the same Win10 system. If I do depth first, let's say I have a limit of 5 users, if there's no one on the system, I go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I add the 5 users on that box before going to the next one. If I go breadth, it's more of a round robin. So if I have 10 systems, no one logged on, user 1 lands on desktop 1, user 2 lands on desktop 2, user 3, desktop 3, et cetera, et cetera. So the session host really is just a VM. So it's called a session host here in terms of WVD, but it is actually just a VM. So in the Azure space, that's a SKU. Any available SKU that we have in Azure, you can use across any region in Azure as a session host for WVD. You can deploy off the marketplace image. You can bring your own image. You can customize your image. You can put it in the shared image gallery, another feature of Azure, and then deploy off of that. And this also determines the location of the deployment. The application group is where we actually do our assignments and we determine what is published where. So by default, when I spin up a WVD instance and I create a host pool and then I create an application group, it's going to build for me a full desktop, right? We call it a DAG. So it's a desktop application group. You also have the ability to do remote app, which would be publishing individual applications off of one of those session hosts. And then the assignment. So if I'm assigning either a group of users or individual users to that application group, they will be presented then to the underlying session host or host pool that is tied to that. And then the workspace is really a collection of application groups. So perfect example here would be, internally at Microsoft, we've got published desktops that we've got access to. And I've got, when I log into my WVD sessions, I've got options for East US, West US, Central US, East Asia, Northern Europe. I've got all these options for where I can log into. And those are all individual workspaces. And within those workspaces, I've got published applications, full desktops that are available to me to pick from. So if I'm here where I am today, which is Indianapolis, where I live, I log on to my East or Central US desktop and off I go. Okay, diagnostic logging. So this is a newer feature that we added in the V2 release of WVD. Important call out here is this is not enabled by default, right? So any kind of diagnostic level logging inside of Azure, you have to turn on. right? So you've got the Azure Activity Log, which is going to track all the changes and everything else that are happening in Azure at the control plane layer. But individual resources, like a WVD deployment, you have to turn this on. And we do that because there's obviously a cost to storing some of those logs. So we want to make sure that users can pick and choose what they want to enable there. But it lets you collect some of this important kind of data. I'm not going to read through all of these different items, but the whole concept here is some of these diagnostic logging things like the feed. So are users able to successfully log into the workspace? That's collected by that log data. Can they see the resources that I publish to them, whether it's individual apps or full desktops? Can I see the connection state, right? Is it working okay? Can I see latency from their endpoint into the WVD service, right? So all of those things are tracked. And then this is an example of a Power BI dashboard. You've got all kinds of options for how you want to visualize that data, but the important thing is that you turn it on and collect it if there's information there that you'll find valuable. And usually, that is the case. There's a lot of good, valuable information there. So the other nice thing about WVDs, we talked about this earlier, kind of the components, and really, again, the secret sauce to WVDs is middle part here that we take care of for you. But we've got a lot of flexibility, right? So it's all open RESTful API. So you are able to extend that control plane and management plane to something else, right? If you wanted to write your own GUI and web front end for WVD, you can do it. I don't have anyone that's done that, but it's certainly something you could do. That said, if we look at Citrix and where they would fit into WVD, so that management plane now, very, very easy, very simple. And I've got a lot of customers that have done this. They're using the Citrix management services, and Loay is going to go into deeper detail on why you might do that over native WVD. There's certainly a lot of advantages to some of the capabilities that Citrix has. But again, I can replace just that management plane, or I can even go further, right? I can do Citrix receivers, and then that agent over here is going to change a little bit, to the Citrix agents. But it's very easy to swap this stuff in and out as you see fit. And then, of course, we've got a very, very tight relationship with Citrix. We have for many, many years. We just extended it recently. It's an even bigger announcement. First time we've ever done a joint announcement, which kind of seems hard to believe. But in the past, it was Citrix making an announcement about their Microsoft partnership and Microsoft making an announcement about their Citrix partnership. Well, this time we did a joint where we did it together. So it just goes to show you how closely we're working. These are relatively newer offerings, but there's a whole bunch of these offerings that are out there in the Azure marketplace that you can just click on and deploy, and then off you go, right? These are just a couple of them. These are newer ones that we've published. And I think Loay is going to go into some further details on what we've got that's out there and what's coming. Loay, you want to take over?
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thumbs up. I'm assuming everything's going well, so I'll continue with that. Of course, I had to put the names again in the middle of the session, which is a bit odd, but I had a reason. So, and basically, for you, I'm assuming most of you are Citrix experts, so you probably have seen our new branding, but it was my first time using that deck of branding, so I was pretty proud about it, so I had to do this. So, but on that note, the one thing I want to highlight in here, Citrix is looking into the future, they're reinventing parts of the business and so forth, and part of it is the announcement that Eric just mentioned. And one thing I want to highlight, beyond the joint announcement, it was actually an announcement where Microsoft said that Citrix is a preferred workspace, and Citrix announced that Microsoft Azure specifically, or Microsoft in general, is a preferred cloud provider. It doesn't mean that Microsoft is not going to do additional enhancement to their own product, WVD, or working with other partners, and vice versa. We're going to still support other clouds and so forth. But the key aspect here is that we're saying we're going to do a bit of co-development when it comes even to engineering aspects. You're going to see things coming in the next few months, and as well as a go-to-market with some joint SKUs and so forth. So stay tuned on that. So let's jump into the core of it. So again, Citrix and Azure. Citrix has been a Microsoft partner for a long time. And the one thing, if I'm going to highlight one thing in here, I'm going to say, if you look at our Citrix cloud service, I could say about 80% of our Cloud-hosted ones are landing in Azure. So we can see the customer choice in there when it comes to our product and the clouds. Again, we've got it on-prem and different clouds, but that's one thing we've noticed when it comes to cloud. So I'm going to go quickly through this slide and talk about the different offerings we have. If we go from the left, which is the most simplistic from a user perspective, which is Citrix Managed Desktop, I'll call it a turnkey solution where we manage the control plane as well as the VDAs, the virtual desktop agents. Again, you own the image itself. However, we could use our own subscription to host that VDA, or you can bring your own subscription as well. But kind of we manage the whole end-to-end process. Then your middle bucket in here, you can see it's Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service. That's the most prominent for us. It's the most flexible, and there's a lot of bells and whistles in there. And on the right-hand side, it's the more comprehensive workspace, what we refer to, which is our different services, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, endpoint management, content collaboration, others analytics, and so forth. So the one thing I want to highlight across all our solutions, we do support Windows Virtual Desktop entitlement. So if you have that entitlement, we have the rights to use it for you, as well as the Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session SKU. Again, that is an Azure-only SKU, and you have that entitlement to use it with our service. All right, looking at this image, which is pretty much, this is the WVD image on a high level. Again, I didn't do it a lot of justice, but it's just what we saw from Erick a few minutes back. So you can see the control plane in the middle side. On the right-hand side, there is the user subscription where they land their desktops or host pools. You've got your connection back, if you look at the lower part of the image, to your data center where you go to your data if it hasn't moved to the cloud, your AAD and so forth, or your Active Directory. And of course, on the left-hand side, it's the connectivity, which is the client side. So that's the current Windows Virtual Desktop real estate on a high level. So let me show you from an architectural perspective where there's value in there. So if I say Citrix Cloud, of course, there is our management plane. For all practical purposes, from a user and operator perspective, it's what you know from a Citrix Cloud. It's not like you have to configure WVD and do Citrix. You're just dealing with the Citrix Cloud component, the CVAT service. Now, on the back end, there is some communication between our service and the WVD service, but that's totally transparent from you as an operator or user. So for all practical purposes, the things you know and you've used for a while. And on the right-hand side, I'm showing some of the list of the value add that comes through with that. Then if I look at the protocol, of course, we're going to use the HDX protocol in this case instead of the RDP, and you get additional value add there that I'm listing. Additional clients that we support, anywhere from Raspberry Pi to Mac to iOS, HTML5, et cetera, et cetera. And when we talk about the hybrid story, today, WVD is an Azure-only offering. You can connect to the backends on your on-prem using things like Extrastat and VPN. When you look at the Citrix, no, you can connect not only to your backend data, you can also have your backend VMs or VDAs. Some VDAs might not always move to the cloud. You might have VDAs in different clouds for different reasons. And we do support that from a single pane of glass. The one thing I would highlight, though, in here, when you're using the Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session, that can only be used again in Azure. You can manage 2 different clouds, but that image is only supported in Azure with your WVD entitlement. Again, we support multiple identity providers, AAD and beyond, as well as SaaS apps. Okay, so this is kind of the architectural view of the different value adds. So let's break it down. In the next few slides, specifically the 5 next slides, I'm going to have them in different buckets from an architectural perspective. So let me highlight it here. When I look about desktop virtualization in general, I think of three users. There's more than that, but I'll start with the three main ones. There's the operators, the folks that build it. And then you've got your help desk. Those are the folks that pick up the phone and answer a user saying, my desktop is slow. And then there's the user themselves that are logging on and off to those sessions. And again, a solution lives and dies there. If the users just can't tolerate the experience, it's over. If you've got great experience, the user will love the experience, and you might even deploy more apps in a virtualized environment. On top of those, there are users that are always there, your CISOs, your security information officers. So security is an aspect of it. That's the pillar. And the fifth pillar is, of course, the money factor, the economics of it. So those are the 5 different pillars you're going to see popping up in my next few slides. After that, I'm going to pick additional features. I'm going to drill further through them. We might not get through all of them, but those are my next 5 key slides, then we go further. All right, so let's talk about management, the operator, the person that builds it and manages it day in, day out. So what are some of the key value adds here? The first one is the one I touched on, which is the hybrid cloud. So I can look at it from different aspects of facets. The first one is you've got some applications, some of your data plane that has moved to Azure, and some of it, for different reasons, you still have it on-prem. Usually in an architectural session, I'd say I'd like the app to be the closest possible to the data. So in this case, your app might live in the data center, and a set of other apps might live in the cloud. So from that single management pane, you could have those 2 apps virtualized from 2 different points. Another aspect or view of hybrid is that sometimes you want to do migrations, and it's way easier when you have a single pane of glass, you've got all your stuff in on-prem, and you want to migrate it to Azure, that you could use that simple tool. And we do have some migration guides that we actually published about a month ago on how to do this and move specifically a PVS environment running specifically on ESX, how could you move it to Azure? So that's very helpful when you're talking about hybrid clouds. Going next to the next one is our image and provisioning technology. A lot of you might know we've got 2 key ones. One is PVS, provisioning services, and the other is machine creation services, MCS. When we talk about the big hyperscalers or big cloud, currently the supported mechanism is machine creation services. So if I'm going to highlight a few key value adds in here, I'd say it's one of the most robust image management solutions on the market in general. If you want to update your catalogs, it's a right click. If you want to move between different versions of your image, it's a right click away. It's very strong when it comes to starting and stopping VMs and saving costs. We'll tackle more of that in Autoscale. And there's additional features within it, things like MCSIO that helps you with cost saving and even enhancing the performance of your VMs and users ultimately. Of course, there is also Citrix app layering, which helps you, again, with image management. And that's to layer your image from an OS layer. Then you can think of it as a platform layer, like the drivers or the agents for Azure versus Hyper-V versus different hypervisors and so forth. Then you can think of the app layer and the data layer for the users. And the cool thing about that is that you keep those layers, and in different catalogs, you can merge them differently. For your marketing department versus engineering department, you don't have to build a whole new OS. You can use that same OS layer and merge it with a different set of app layers and so forth. Or if it resides in different clouds, that platform layer, you can layer it in. So again, that's a very, very, very powerful feature and tool there. All right. Going to my next user, in this case, as I mentioned, the help desk, monitoring, which is a key thing. If it's beyond the help desk, again, some of those spans multiple personas, but I'm going to focus on the help desk. In this case, again, the example I give, someone gives you a call, my machine is slow, what do you do next? One of the very, very powerful tools that existed for a while, and now it's cloud-based for us, part of this CVAT service, is Citrix Director, and gives you a lot of insights about logon times and so forth. Again, if I give an example, a user calls, my log off is slow. Let's take that specifically. You can go to Director and look at each logon of user, and it'll break it down. Like, okay, your auth took 0.5 seconds. Your load profile took about 15 seconds. Your GPO application took about 12 seconds. Your interactive layer took about, so you can see what's the slow or aspects. I mean, that's one example. We go into total depth in every single aspect of the user logon, of the interactive session, and so forth. So that's a very, very powerful tool when you've got about 100,000 users logging on. It's pretty hard to kind of wing that support. You need the tooling, and that's one of the very strong tooling we have. The second part is Citrix Analytics. So we've got for operations, again, that spans, and for security, so it spans security. Again, it's a similar model, but there's more of, if I'm gonna kind of highlight one thing about Citrix Analytics, there's a more proactive aspect. There's certain actions that the system can take. As opposed to Director, it's like you log on and you analyze. Of course, there's many, many other features. I added Citrix Session Recording. That also falls into two buckets. Security, sometimes you want to see what's happening in that session, or even for user education or troubleshooting with the user. So you can retrieve that session, play it back, see where those slowness or issues happening with the user. All right, going to the third bucket, which is the user experience. Let's talk about some of the feature sets that are key value adds there. Of course, we always talk about our protocol in general. Again, we still believe this is one of the great protocols in the industry, specifically when you think about low latency, variable network conditions, and so forth. We can add different optimizations, things like team optimizations, Skype for Business as well, content in the browser, redirection, and many, many, many other things. I mean, I can have hours of sessions on this one. One thing on Teams, you guys might have watched a session on Teams, so I'm not going to go deep, but I'll highlight one thing, like WVD does support team optimization, but one thing I'd highlight, we support Windows endpoint, we support Linux endpoints, we support, we're supporting Mac, it's in progress, and iOS and so forth. So we're always more inclusive of different endpoints. The other thing I would highlight is the personalization layer. Things like multi-session write-back for FS logics, redirect for large files, as opposed to copying that from your profile back to your VM. You can redirect it and straight connect it. On your SMB share, streaming profiles, active write-back, which helps with eliminating / minimizing data loss if a session dies in the middle. We always have active write-back. That's kind of writing parts of the profile back to the share. Again, all these features you might not quantify by dollar, but data loss is key. And those are different things that you can enable with the Citrix solution, all in all. Of course, we've got our networking as well, SD-WAN, and our ADC that helps optimize your connectivity to O365. Again, many other features I haven't listed in here. Next, let's talk about optimization in general. And I'll pick two things in here. The first one is WAM, Window, Workspace Environment Management. So probably if I'm going to focus on one thing, I'm going to focus on the noisy neighbor. Like let's say you've got 30 or 40 sessions on a single server. With WAM, we could make sure that this one user that's hogging the CPU is not doing that. We can do that by decreasing the priority of that process in the OS to make sure that one user doesn't affect all others, in addition to RAM as well, and so forth. And that's key for a user experience. As a matter of fact, we've done some internal testing. It's not published, but probably in the near future that shows that enabling WAM could increase your densities by about 10 to 15%. That's hard money to the bottom line. Of course, auto scale. I mean, that is enabling machines up and down as you need them. We could do that in two different ways. The first one is based on a schedule. You just give us the schedule and tell us the number of machines you want based on that schedule, or based on the level of demand. So on a high level, if I'm going to sum this up, you can say, across the day or peak hours, I want you to make sure there's 10% of my machines that are running and available. Once those are depleted, there's always a 10% head buffer. In a sliding window, there's always 10% additional. And once the machines are being disconnected or left, we shut things down. So that's, again, a very, very powerful feature. Everything I'm talking about in here can make use of your Azure WVD entitlement, as well as applicable to Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. Okay, going to security. Again, things like application protection policies, which help with key logging and screen scraping. So the key loggers wouldn't be able to kind of take your screen captures or your keyboard punches as well. If a user wants to do screen captures, we mitigate that or don't allow that. There's also things like, not related to this, application protection policies, but within the security realm, watermarking as well policies, where you can have a watermark of the username or the IP address it's coming from. So in case it's a different scenario where you're screen capturing, it kind of showed that. Citrix Analytics for security. Again, if I'm summing this one up, think of your credit score. We have that similar model where you've got your security score. You start as neutral, but then we see your behavior. Are you really going to content collaboration and copying a lot of high-value data, like gigs of that? And we could flag that, and we could have different actions. It could be things like just terminate that session, or just send a flag to the admin and say, you know, user X is downloading exceptionally high number of files. It might be normal. And we detect those anomalies based on certain heuristics with AI, or it could be thresholds that the admin has put. So that's on a high level. And of course, in the authentication world, we support different identity providers, as I mentioned, multi-factor auth, single sign-on, all the good and fun features that you've seen. Again, most of those slides are nothing new to Citrix. It's things probably you've used when doing deployments on-prem. Those value adds also carry to the cloud. So let's take some of the fun features. Again, I can talk to many different features in depth, but let's talk about machine creation services. And I'm not going to go through the machine creation service flow, but on a high level, what we do is we take a master image that you give us, we create a snapshot, and that would be our main clone that we push to 100 VMs. And there's going to be multiple disks involved. The first one is what we refer to as the identity disk, and that's the machine identity. And then, depending on the hypervisor, you've got your master image, which is your VHD for the OS, and your diff disk, if you're talking Hyper-V, which is the Delta. Well, in Azure, there's no concept of diff disk, so it's slightly different. Basically, you've got your identity disk and your OS disk, but there's a Delta that's written to that OS disk. And every time the users log off or the machine is shut down, we refresh that VM and delete all the diffs, or in all honesty, we recreate a new OS disk in this case. So that way the machine is still fresh. So that's kind of on a high level. So let me focus on one specific or two specific features when it comes to MCS. The first one is on-demand provisioning. So on a high level, today, if you create a catalog of 1,000 VMs and you go to Azure, you'll honestly not see 1,000 VMs. You're going to see no VMs. So that kind of makes the creation pretty snippy and fast. But the key thing about here is saving money. What we do is when you turn on the machine, we create that OS disk and we start the VM. We create the VM and start it, which is really fast. But in this case, we're saving on two aspects. The first aspect is the VM cost, and not only that, it's also the disk cost, the OS disk cost. And when you start thinking of 1,000 VDAs or more, those add up. Those are substantial part of the cost. And once the VM is shut down, we delete the VM and that OS disk. Again, I'm talking in a pooled environment scenario. We always keep the identity disk, which is a small disk. That's cost, but it's a really small disk that we use. That helps in faster catalog machine, definitely helps in OS, in cost saving, for VMs and disk, as I mentioned. I also show this blog in here that shows how fast we start and stop machines in an Azure environment. There's depth in there that you can look at and certain configuration to even make it more snippy there. The second feature I want to highlight is what we refer to as MCS-IO, Machine Creation Services IO and caching. So on a high level, in this case, if you think of PVS, which is a very popular technology in on-premises for us, which doesn't work in Azure. We took the best of that world and tried to put it in MCS. And basically, if we refer to the cache disk, we have that same construct with MCS. And basically what happens is, once the user starts writing to that OS, we cache that into memory, and then we flush that into disk every now and then. So first off, even if you're using SSD or HDD, memory is always going to be faster. And then when you flush 100 megs to disk, it's way better to do it once as opposed to do it with multiple IOPS and as they're coming. That also helps in writing. So I'm going to check on my time. Okay. This is the construct. This is how it's going to look like in general in Azure. You're going to see 3 disks, the identity disk, the OS disk, and the write cache disk. Again, when you shut down the VMs, those 2 disks cease to exist. When you turn them on, they come back. Let me talk about the benefits of this quickly. First off, in general, it improves performance. I'm going to give you some of the testing we've done here. I'm going to tackle it, and I'm going to link to a deeper paper that discusses that. So if you look at those different bars, probably the 2 bars I'm going to highlight in this case is the second bar and the 4th one. This talks about testing. We've used login VSI to test the user densities and user responsiveness. And if you look at the second one, we were using a VM in Azure that's running on a 128 gig premium storage SSD. And the 4th one is using a 64 gig standard HDD disk in Azure, which is substantially cheaper, but we're using a 2 gig cache. So again, that uses a bit of the RAM, so you take that hit, but you need to do that balance. But if you look at the user densities when we run the workload, which is the knowledge workload, you can see the second bar shows 75 gigs. I believe that was an F16 VM. Again, the paper outlines that, but that's to my recollection. And that same F16 VMs with an HDD in Azure got 77 VMs. But you know what? That's not the key. That's not the killer point. If you look at the response time within login VSI, that drops from about 900 milliseconds. That's a math of they open Notepad, they do different thing, and they add that math to give you a cumulative number. 900, it drops to about 850. And that's a substantial drop to user experience with clicks and so forth. And again, if I even go further, what we measured on the back end, we said, show me the write response time. And if you're looking at the SSD, which is the premium disk, If I'm drawing a line in here, I'd say it's a 5 to 6 millisecond, right, within the session. However, if I look at with write cache, what we're essentially doing with writing to RAM and flushing to this with our filter driver, and it's showing a 2 millisecond response time. That's about the third and way more steady. Okay, and that's again comparing a 64 standard HDD compared to a premium 128 gig SSD. Again, I'm not saying that's always the right solution. Remember, in Azure with premium SSD, you get a higher SLA. So that might be a key thing, but it's all about decision points that you're gonna make as an architect or as a customer.
Hello. Looks like we got time. We're at
Sounds great. Okay, so let me wrap it up here. You had a full session on team optimization. I'm not going to go through that. Browser content redirection is another one that works. Think of Teams optimization as similar content, a construct where we're really moving the rendering to the endpoint as opposed to doing it on the VDA. Again, I'm keeping those slides for your benefit. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Loay. Yeah, sorry, we're running out of time, so we just want to make sure that we stick to the time for everybody's information. So now we're going to be going to the roundtables. So make sure that first, I do want to thank you guys for doing that. I know even though that Citrix and Microsoft's been working together for a while, it's great to hear that you guys are getting the tighter knit. And also it's great to hear about this stuff, even though, you know, WVD's been out for a couple of years. I know there's still a lot of companies that are still trying to get over to it. So it's always nice to hear. I do want to remind everybody that now is the time, is your final chance to submit your passports, to make sure that you jump on there. You have all your sponsors, get all the code names, and turn that in so we can get those prizes and such ready for you. Also, next will be the roundtables. We have WVD, CVAD, PowerShell, Teams, Citrix. Make sure you go to the one you want. And we'll hopefully see you guys all over there. Thank you.